The Edmonton Oilers and Florida Panthers are in a hard-fought battle for the Stanley Cup. The series even at 1-1. We'll hear from both teams as to how we got here and what it'll take to win the series, plus a new coach coming in Dallas. We'll have all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Oilers and a familiar voice and face to Locked On NHL fans, Nick Zararis. And Nick, what a thrilling game 2 was, and yet it's got to be a little disappointing for the Oilers to fall short in double overtime.
Of course, we were talking about it before we jumped on. It's hard to be mad in a double overtime game that goes as long as that did. You know it's going to be a funky goal. Skinner himself would tell you he probably could have slowed that down and it wouldn't have crossed. But both teams had a number of chances throughout both overtimes. And you get to that point, you know it's going to be something funky or dumb that ultimately wins the game. And it was an untimely Evan Bouchard pinch, which by and large haven't happened in these playoffs. And I know Bouchard's a very lightning rod player when it comes to conversation because he's a little bit unconventional in his toolbox as a defenseman, skews towards offense, doesn't really use his size, even though he's a bigger guy, doesn't skate incredibly well. So he can occasionally get caught in those in-betweens where he has to make a decision, and he took an extra half second to make said decision and allows Marchand to go around him. But the goal, the play I come back to, and why I feel a lot different about this year's Oilers team than last year's Oilers team, is the fact they even got to overtime to begin with. You know, that 3-minute stretch at the end of regulation that culminates in the Perry goal, as good as they were last year, I didn't feel the degree of inevitability that they were going to score there. When you have a 6-man unit, and God bless Perry, who's doing this at his age and making that incredible individual effort as he's falling down, as he's getting his stick jammed, you're getting contributions from everyone. These games, no matter what the score is, you know, game 1, they were down 3-1. They come all the way to back to win in overtime. They get out to a nice lead in game 2. They blow the lead. They still tie it and force overtime. They have continuously found ways to get those. And Florida's a good team. You know, Florida is going to have counter punches. And as much as we would like this to be an Oilers in 4 or 5 scenario, it just wasn't very realistic. This Florida team is remarkable. I was reading an article yesterday. They're 24-12 in the playoffs on the road under Paul Maurice, which is kind of insane. They are a truly great team, and the Oilers made just a few mistakes. You know, a Marchand shorthanded goal and the Marchand overtime winner. Those are 2 plays that don't happen all that often. But in a game like this against a great team, it is those 1 or 2 mistakes that are ultimately going to swing the game.
Talk to me a little bit about Stuart Skinner, because, you know, the coach went out of his way to defend him and talk about the effort that he made. Is the criticism of him fair after game 2?
I think anytime you're playing the Panthers, who magically seem to always end up falling on the goalie, no matter where they get bumped, it's really hard for me to be pressed about some of the goals. I think the Marchand goal he probably should have had, but other than that, he also got seriously shaken up on the one play with Bennett early in this game. So I'm inclined to give Stu a little bit of benefit of the doubt. He was great in game 1, especially in that second period when Florida made a really prolonged push. I think a lot of the Oilers conversation around Skinner can largely be tied to something I talk about on Locked On Oilers all the time. If Stuart Skinner just needs to be one of the 19 guys on a given night, most of the time that's good enough. You know, the same way we just said most of the time the Oilers play the way they did in game 2, they're going to win. If Stuart Skinner needs to be the difference between winning and losing for the Oilers, that's where they get into a problematic area, because they're just not built for that. They are not built around Skinner being a game winner by himself. Yes, he had 2 of those games in the series against the Stars, which was entirely out of nowhere. But for the most part, he's going to give you 25 to 30 saves. He's probably going to give up 2 or 3 goals. If you can score 4, which they have in these first 2 games, most of the time you put 4 past Sergei Bobrovsky, that's enough to win. So I'm more inclined to say it's a little bit more on the defense, and particularly the penalty killing, which has still really struggled to get going, even close to what they were last year in these playoffs.
Give me some unsung heroes on the Oilers, besides Corey Perry, who we've been talking about last week and a little bit already this week. Some guys who are a little bit under the radar, but are really helping this team get to where they are right now.
I've loved what I've gotten out of Kapanen and Podkolzin in this series. And the Zach Hyman loss is definitely felt, especially on the power play. But the big thing Hyman was doing in these playoffs, he was leading the playoffs in hits. He was, I think, 18 hits away from the playoff record for hits in a single postseason when he broke his wrist in the Dallas series. And Podkolzin and Kapanen have largely filled that billing. Evander Kane has definitely been inclined to throw his body around. But for guys like Kapanen and Arvidsson, who are only playing 11, 12, 13 minutes a night, if you're going out there every 4th shift for 45 seconds as hard as you can to put pressure on the forecheck, I mean, that's what forces the no-sec delay of game in game 1, is that Podkolzin is bearing down on him, and instead of trying to absorb that hit or get out of the way, he throws the puck out of the rink, delay a game, Oilers come down and score on the power play there. That forecheck has really been integral to their success during prolonged stretches of this series, because Florida doesn't want their defensemen to really make plays on the puck the same way the Oilers do. They want their guys, that first pass as quick as it can be. They love rimming it out. They love using the glass. So the more decisions you force those defenders to make in a vacuum, the more you force a Nate Schmidt or a Kulikov or a Mikula to make a decision actively as opposed to just rimming it along, the more opportunities you have to force them to make mistakes, which we saw more of in game 1 and a little bit less of in game 2.
You mentioned the penalty kill. How can they make it a little bit better? Because it may not be great, but how can they make it good enough?
So the real quandary there is, structurally, everybody cheats to one side because they're doing a three alignment, and then the most outward forward of the penalty killers is trying to pressure the puck and force it the other way. And they've had a lot of success when that's been McDavid or Janmark, and they've had McDavid integrated onto the penalty kill at various points in these playoffs just to kind of give them a different look because it's been so poor. But because everyone is skewing towards one side, that back door is almost always open, and that creates a really good look for that person. So that first penalty killer has to do a better job of forcing that puck to move before the puck holder wants to. That's really been the biggest thing, is once the attacking team gets set up in the offensive zone, the Oilers have had a really hard time of forcing even a difficult pass, let alone a change in possession.
Next 2 games are in South Florida. What is going to be different about being the road team, and what are the keys to winning at least one game down in Florida?
The big thing is you can't hide McDavid from Barkov anymore. I expect that will be the most notable difference for the Oilers in these next 2 games. We do know that because the Oilers have broken up McDavid and Draisaitl for mostly 5-on-5, except for when they are down late in games, that does create a bit of a question as far as, do you want to play Barkov against McDavid or Draisaitl? But that'll be the single biggest difference. And I'll be very curious to see how the Oilers choose to match that energy Florida typically plays with. And look, Florida's a great road team, but Florida in particular, when they get that forecheck going and they really start to bear down on you, it becomes suffocating. And surviving the first 10 minutes of game 3 will go a long way. If they get out of the first period only 1-0 or 0-0, if you're the Oilers, and that would be very out of character based on the way these first 2 games have gone, which have been extremely high scoring. But if you're only within one or you're tied after one on the road against this Florida team, that's exactly where they need to be, because they've shown the ability to come back from these deficits. Obviously, you don't want always have to come back and win these games, but they have shown the ability to win in a variety of different ways. So get through that first period as clean as you can and go from there. Florida is a truly great team, but this Oilers team is better than last year's and has every capability of pulling this off. They just got to do it.
All right. It's going to be an exciting series. We know that. Nick, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find you and where they could find the podcast?
So Locked On Oilers is available on all the major podcasting platforms on YouTube. On Twitter and Instagram, my ad is Nick Zararis, Nick Zararis. On TikTok, it's Nick Zararis Sports. Thanks, Gil.
Hey, thanks, Nick. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You could track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. I'd still love eating out, but not at the expense of my financial well-being. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you could use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Florida Panthers, Armando Velez. And Armando, what a dramatic win for the Florida Panthers. Talk to me about the emotional impact of winning in double overtime in game 2.
It's huge because you never want to go down 0-2 in a series. I mean, yeah, you would get the home ice advantage, but when you think about the Panthers of how well that they've been performing on the road, I mean, 9 of their 13 wins in this entire postseason have been on the road. I mean, they're just a few wins away from breaking the record for most road wins in an entire playoffs. So the fact that you would go down 0-2 would have been so deflating, especially 2 overtime games where it could have been one way or the other. I mean, this could be 0-2 in the Panthers direction. This could be 0-2 in the Oilers direction. But I mean, the fans are getting what they want. Nobody likes a short series. So going back 1-1, it's just been a treat for fans, not even outside of the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. So it's been what a treat. And thankfully, the Panthers just dominating that overtime, only allowing 1 shot on goal, and the big save on Kapanen from Sergei Bobrovsky, and then Brad Marchand on the breakaway to win it in overtime. And especially because earlier in that game, he got the shorthanded goal that gave the Panthers a 4-3 lead. I mean, Brad Marchand, what can you say about him? 3 goals, Nate Schmidt, 4 assists. Those have been guys who have been just performing well. Seth Jones has been steady with the blue line, him and Nico Mikkola. That has been such a great pair. I mean, you can't ask for a better situation for the Panthers. But I mean, and it's coming with a team that there's been 9 periods played, and you could argue that the Panthers have only won 3 of them.
Giving up the tying goal in the final seconds of regulation, what does it say about this team that they did not fold and they were able to overcome that and win in double overtime?
It's quite hilarious because after the game, Brad Marchand and Sam Bennett were talking about just how Brad Marchand was on the exercise bike in between intermissions, and they were just joking around. Even they were chatting towards each other, saying who's going to get the overtime winner this time around. So it's just a loose bunch that there's not a lot that phases this group, even when they do give up a lead. I mean, yeah, did the Panthers sit back a little bit? Did they try to play a shutdown type of game? Yeah, but I mean, the puck wasn't in their offensive end quite at all in that third period. So that's a little bit for the fans, kind of a stressful period for the Panthers when you're losing consecutive draws and you're unable to clear the end, and you don't even get a shot on the empty net. But at the same time, the Panthers were just continued to be composed and finding a way to get a win. And to think that even in the first overtime, there was chances by Sam Reinhart on a breakaway, missed the net, and then a strip from Carter Verhaeghe to Brad Marchand, 2 chances, one of them that hits off the post. I mean, it was just thankful for the Panthers, some poetic justice after a few chances earlier.
What concerns you the most after the first 2 games, and what do the Panthers need to improve to fix that concern?
I think the thing that concerns me the most is the fact that for Edmonton, it's Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl have not scored a single goal at 5-on-5. McDavid has a whole bunch of assists. Both of Draisaitl's goals have been on the power play, but so they haven't been unleashed yet. But at the same time, you could argue that for the Panthers, that the top stars for them have not been unleashed neither. Obviously, Matthew Tkachuk has kind of been invisible in this series. Sam Reinhart doesn't have a power play goal in these playoffs. And after getting hobbled in that Eastern Conference Final with that knee-on-knee collision with Sebastian Aho, Barkov is a -4 for the Panthers. So you could argue that the Panthers have also not been unleashed. And to think that on their end, they have the special teams advantage. I was saying before the series, if the Panthers were equal in special teams, they are going to find a way to win the series. And the fact that there's been so many penalties to begin with, I think that as the series goes on and as there's going to be less penalties called, that's going to be advantage of the Florida Panthers for them. So I think that this is a great situation for the Panthers as the series flips to Sunrise, Florida.
What other advantages do you see Florida having at this point?
I really do think that the goaltending is just in the Panthers' favor. I mean, there's really of the 8 goals that Sergei Bobrovsky has given up, I'll maybe put like 2 of them on him. The first one from Arvidsson, maybe a little bit of a screen. Yeah, it touched his arm and then went in. And then the Evander Kane goal where he was right on top of his crease and had a little bit of time before it beat his glove and went off the post and in. But it hasn't been those backbreaking goals like the two 5-hole ones that Stuart Skinner has given up on the other side. So I think that's a big advantage for the Panthers. And right now, I think that their blue line is a lot better with especially in that second period for the Panthers in Game 2, where it was each pair that the Edmonton Oilers put out there. The Panthers had a 1.5-minute shift on each pair of the Edmonton Oilers in Game 2. So and Chris Knobloch has shifted the D pairs in practice today. So that's maybe something that the Panthers could expose a little bit. And so Nurse is with Evan Bouchard, and Matthias Ekholm is now on the middle pair. So this is the point of the series where the Panthers are kind of like licking their chops a little bit, because the fact that even though, like I mentioned earlier, they've only won 3 of the 9 periods, the periods that they did win, it was more of a swing in their direction versus some of them have been slightly in the Oilers' direction. I mean, in Game 1, the Oilers owned the possession, but the Panthers owned the scoreboard. Right. With the net front presence of Brad Marchand, the challenge, and then Brad Marchand scoring on that power play goal. So the Panthers have also been pretty opportunistic, even though they did give up that 3-1 lead in Game 1.
The series shifts now to South Florida. How will the Panthers coaches try to slow down Draisaitl and McDavid with home ice advantage and the last change?
It's funny because with the last change for the first 2 games of the series, Chris Knobloch has not been afraid of putting the McDavid line against Barkov, and the fact that the Panthers have been able to attack McDavid and Draisaitl when they were on the ice. I mean, the game-winning goal was when Draisaitl and McDavid were on, and Evan Bouchard on that pinch. So the fact that you have that luxury of putting maybe an Anton Lundell, Brad Marchand, and Eetu Luostarinen on that line more, and then maybe the Barkov line, depending on the status of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, because he's right now a game-time decision, you put him on that line. I think it's a chance for the Panthers to truly feast and for more of those offensive chances for that top line of Alexander Barkov, Carter Verhaeghe, and Sam Reinhart to get something going for them. So I think that's going to be really impactful for the Panthers here coming into game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final.
If you're the Panthers, do you prefer Draisaitl and McDavid on the same line, or you like it better when they're split up?
You like it when they're together, but you also like it if their minutes distribution are just way ahead of any defenseman, because that was what the minutes looked like in game 2. Connor McDavid, how rare is it to see a forward have the most time on ice of anyone when you're carrying 12 forwards? Six defensemen and 12 forwards for each team, and Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are just getting tired out constantly. Every other shift, every time there's an ice in the puck, you know that they're the first guys on the board, up jumping over the boards, even when it's the fourth line. So the fact is, even though the minutes for the fourth line for the Panthers is around like somewhere around the 10-minute mark, you're a little bit more rested, so it's easier to go through those shifts. Although obviously the talent discrepancy between McDavid and Draisaitl versus the line that has Tomas Nosek, AJ Greer, possibly AJ Greer if he plays, and Jonah Gadjevich, that is obviously advantage Oilers, but you're a little bit more rested, and hopefully for the Panthers, they're able to clear out the pucks and roll more of those 4 lines. So it just goes to show that the Panthers really trust their ability to roll them.
All right, Armando, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
They can find me personally on social media at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at @LO_FLA Panthers. And it's the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube, we're getting one step closer to 1,700 subscribers. It's been such a run, thanks to the Florida Panthers and their success. So follow us there, as we'll be covering everything with the Stanley Cup Final, and we'll be boots on the ground for games 3, 4, and 6.
All right. Thanks so much, Armando.
Thank you as always, Gil.
It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Stars, Joey Erickson. And Joey, a little surprise after the season. Your team goes to the conference final 3 years in a row, and yet Peter DeBoer out as head coach. Were you surprised when this news broke?
I was a little bit, but as we got farther and farther away from Game 5 against Edmonton, which of course was the eventual elimination game from the Stars, I got a little less surprised, and I pretty much landed on the fact that I think it was the right decision by general manager Jim Nil, and it was really, really interesting to hear all the conversations and rumors, rumblings that were coming out of the Stars dressing room, supposedly after that Game 5 elimination game. And of course, how DeBoer handled pulling Jake Ottinger in that game, which I defended. And even Jim Nil mentioned in his press conference, he had no issue with the pull. But some of the comments, I think, after the game in his post-game presser, I think really did him in. And I don't think it was solely made because of the comments on Ottinger, but it certainly did not help. And Jim Nil mentioned that he thought it was the right decision for the Stars and the organization. And if there was any sort of issues trust-wise or relationship-wise with your franchise goaltender and Jake Ottinger and your number one goalie for the next 6 to 8 years, it was probably the right decision to cut ties with him and move on. But obviously the Stars had a ton of success with him at the helm, and that's not going to be easy to replace. During his 3 seasons in Dallas, he had picked up and accumulated the most points out of any other team in the NHL, but they don't have nothing to show for it, as we all know.
Do you think he lost the locker room at some point?
I wouldn't say that. Nil did speak on that a bit too, and he doesn't believe they lost the locker room. I wouldn't go that far to say he lost the locker room, but I think there was some changes within maybe some relationships there. How could you not? Because he also, during his exit interview a couple of days later, he still had not talked to Jake Ottinger. And I thought that was a massive, massive mistake. And Nil mentioned that may be a bit unfair just because they're processing the loss and everything. But I just feel like as a head coach, you need to go and clarify why you made the decision with your young goaltender just to let him know where you're coming from. And it wasn't all on Jake Ottinger, as he said, but it kind of was the way he put it. So it was really, really fascinating to see it all break down. As I said, it just felt like the further removed from the series we got, it didn't really feel like it was turning in his favor. And it's really, really shocking because Jim Nil also never fires coaches, especially under contract. It's the first time he's ever done that. And DeBoer still had a year left on his deal. So the Stars are going to have a rambunctious offseason once again here.
So what was, I mean, if it wasn't necessarily the Ottinger pulling in the last game, what were some of the other factors that led Nil to make this decision?
I would say it's probably a culmination of the three Western Conference Final exits. Look at just this season. They got outscored 13-5 at 5-on-5. You're not going to be anybody doing that, let alone the Edmonton Oilers with two of the best players on the planet. And for a coach that thrives on offense, right, that's what he's kind of known for. That's his I guess his shtick, right? That's his mantra. Like, he can score, or he can get the offense to figure it out. Well, the last three Western Conference Finals, they haven't figured it out. The power play a season ago, in the first edition of this Edmonton Oilers versus Stars matchup, 0-for-14 on the power play. Not going to beat any team in a 7-game series going 0-for-14 on the power play. And then it was just a really quiet offense again against Vegas a few years ago, right? I think that also played a pretty massive role. I've also said, I think right after Game 5, right after the loss, he had the job still. It was a post-game presser that I think kind of put the nail in the coffin, so to speak. But if you're Jim Nil, you also have to factor in, well, he's done this in a few other places before. He's been very successful. And if you're Nil, you've won back-to-back general managers of the year. You feel like you've put together a damn good roster and you haven't even really sniffed a Stanley Cup. I think he probably believes they should at least have been to a cup. And time again, DeBoer wasn't able to get that done, and I think we can all agree Stars have a pretty dang good roster. It's not perfect. Look at the right side of the defense this season, but that's still a pretty good roster, and he just hasn't got over that hump of the Western Conference Final for whatever reason. I think those were factors that played a role, along with the Jake Ottinger comments.
What was so terrible about that post-series presser?
I just felt like it was piling on your goaltender in a lot of ways. And I know he said, I don't blame it all on Jake, but then he went into, well, it's a big sample size. He's lost 6 out of the last 8 games, whatever it was, against Edmonton. And it just felt like you're piling on a goaltender that just gave up 2 goals on 2 shots. And let's be frank about this. Corey Perry was wide open in front of the net by himself. And then the Stars had a bad change and gave a breakaway to Matthias Janmark. You would like every goaltender, you'd like him to get a piece of those or make a stop. But for a goaltender that you should be praising for what he did to get you to that point. And he just outdueled the best goaltender in the world over the past few years in Connor Hellebuck just a few weeks ago. And that's not to say Jake Ottinger was totally outplayed by Stuart Skinner. I'm not here defending that, Jake's the best goaltender in the world, but he did a lot to get you to that point. And this isn't also a Jake Ottinger that's fighting for a number 1 job next year. This isn't a Jake Ottinger that's, hasn't got paid yet or looking to leave or something, right? He's in trade talk. He's going to be around for 8 years. So maybe you just don't want to deal with some of those tensions. That's why I thought it was pretty bad. Also, it's because this is probably more important, actually, before any of the other points are made, but he's loved in that building. He's loved within the dressing room and that building. So he's a fan favorite. And maybe don't go after the fan favorite or the I guess the office favorite, so to speak.
What will the Stars look for in a replacement? And have there been any candidates out there that have been rumored to be favorites at this point?
Well, I think you have to toss the name Neil Graham out there for favorites, and Jim Nil had a lot to say about him. He had high praise for Neil Graham during the press conference the other day. He, of course, is the AHL coach of the Texas Stars, just a few hours south of Dallas here, and he's also in a Western Conference Final as we're speaking. And he mentioned he's won a lot, and he's developed a lot of players. That's hard to do at that level. 5 winning seasons in Texas, and he's also dealt with the likes of Maverick Bourque, Thomas Harley, Jake Ottinger, some others, so there could be some continuity there. I think another name that maybe has to be thrown out there is like a Jay Woodcroft, right, who was the previous coach before Knobloch in Edmonton. And yeah, you have your host of, recycle coaches, so to speak, that we all talk about at this time. But, I think Jim Nil, he mentioned a lot. He's open. He's open-minded. He's not necessarily looking for a veteran, not less necessarily looking for somebody that's too young also, because at the end of the day, this team is ready to win now, and you have to find a good mix. And he also wanted to be cautious about not taking a step back, because you can make one little change, one bad move, and you take massive steps back. Well, look at what happened in Vancouver this last season. It was a massive step back, and if Dallas isn't careful, they can end up that same boat really, really quickly, and they have a lot more changes they have to do. But I think Neil Graham's probably up there as a top guy. We'll probably find more out after their season's officially done down in the Calder Cup playoffs, but I would throw him up there in the list.
Is there a timetable? Do they want someone in place before the draft, for example?
Yeah, that's a good conversation. I would think so. Of course, they're going to take their time and do their due diligence. I imagine that Nil has already had a top list of candidates, and they did this not too long ago. The Stars are no stranger to making a lot of coaches moves. Before DeBoer, they gone through 4 or 5 guys, I feel like, the last 10 years, probably even more than that. So they're not necessarily strangers to this, but yeah, I would think they would want to get somebody in that they can voice maybe some opinions on, even some free agents. They got a lot of free agents they have to try to re-sign or let walk, so to speak. So I would think, yeah, they would try to get somebody in there, get a philosophy going on, and see what they like about some of the players they do have, or looking out at some others they can bring in.
All right, Joey, it's going to be an exciting off season. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
We're on YouTube, of course, and wherever you get your podcast at Locked On Stars. My personal account, Joey the Jet 19 on X, but follow us on Locked On Stars as well on X. And we'll be covering the DeBoer saga and all the coaching search saga the rest of the way, since the Stars are the only team without one right now.
All right, thanks so much, Joey. Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night until the Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. You could find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank my guests, Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers, Armando Velez of Locked On Florida Panthers, and Joey Erickson of Locked On Stars for joining me today. Don't forget, we are here every day, Monday through Saturday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the NHL as our local experts dig into the biggest stories in the hockey world. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.